professional development webinars. Today, as you can see on the screen, we're going to be talking about using Yellowdig to create business education learning communities. Just a reminder, if everyone would keep their microphones on mute, unless you do have a question or would like to make a comment, please do that as we are recording. And I'm going to go ahead and turn over control to Bob.
Oh, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Erzchek. I'm Yellowdig Senior Community Success Consultant, and I'll give a little bit of a fuller introduction in just a minute. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today. We're looking forward to having a really good conversation about learning community and the social presence and what's it all about. And we've got some wonderful guests here to help us share their experiences. And if I could make the slide transition, I would do that. Okay, there we go. So yeah, as a little bit of a fuller introduction for me, so you know why I'm talking to you today. As I mentioned, I'm Yellowdig Senior Community Success Consultant, but a long time prior to coming to Yellowdig, before the turn of the century, I moved from a career as a lawyer into teaching in higher education. I was not really thrilled with that law career. And so when I got the opportunity to teach, I took it and I loved it, did that for a little while. And then at the turn right of 2001, I started working as an instructional technologist, faculty developer, helping instructors 20 years ago to put their courses online, whether that was straight from distance learning where we were using VHS tapes, or even then we were experimenting with hybrid and blended learning. And while I thought the promise of online learning was pretty much unlimited, I really felt that the tools and the pedagogy of the time did not provide that learning experience, that better experience that I was looking for my students, but also for myself as an instructor. And so I got frustrated in that position and I left and I went back to teaching. And I taught political science for over a decade after that. In my own teaching, I experimented with all kinds of crazy tools and things outside of the learning management system or outside of ed tech tools because of the way they had been. And, it was fun, but they came with their own set of problems. So when I found Yellowdig, it's what I had been looking for all that time. And now I am extremely happy to be supporting our users in our best practices and pedagogy. And I would like to now introduce our panel. I'll start with Grace. Grace, why don't you tell us a little about yourself?
Grace Beam, live in Chattanooga, but teach at Georgia Northwestern Technical College. I'm the Assistant Dean of Business and Public Service Technologies, and I teach in our supply chain management and business management program. And one of my favorite things here is I teach online. I love teaching online. I love playing with ed tech tools. And I have to admit, Yellowdig is my favorite ed tech tool. And I have a background, oh my gosh, this is my fourth career. So I have a background in telecom and then IT management and system implementation, higher education. I always thought I'd love to end my career as a faculty person. And so here I am.
Fantastic, Grace. Thanks. Jill, you're next on my screen.
Yep. So I'm an instructor at GNTC. I also write textbooks for Cengage. I'm an edutainer for IT Pro TV. And I do a lot of conferences and webinars and things. A lot of times that's on IT certifications, but I also have a background in psychology and education. So get a lot of opportunities to talk about learning science and what it takes to really raise up lifelong learners. So that's one of my areas of passionate interest that I get to share a lot at conferences.
Excellent. Thank you, Jill. And finally, we'll go to Julia. Julia, tell us about yourself.
Thank you, Bob. Julia Hopkins. I am an instructor of computer information systems at Georgia Northwestern Technical College. I live in Rome, Georgia, and that is also where my home campus is. In my previous life, I was an instructional designer. So I have a real passion for adult learning theory and learning engagement. And really, my goal is to bring that experience into the online classroom.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And we're going to jump into the conversation in just a minute. I want to share, because some of you may not know what Yellowdig is, and we're going to be talking about it a little bit. I want to share a little bit of context about Yellowdig, and I'm going to try to make the slide go forward. Hardest part of the job is is getting where we need to go on Zoom. So Yellowdig is essentially a learning community platform and pedagogy. It really creates a connected learning experience for students, oftentimes in the course context, and we'll talk about that probably extensively today, but Yellowdig is also available for all aspects of that student life cycle, connecting students to the institution, to the class, to the courses, to their programs, and to each other. Throughout the entire learning experience and beyond with alumni. But beyond that, you know, I want to skip to this slide. Yellowdig, you can see a little screenshot of it there in the right corner of that, basically allows students in the classroom context to have much more agency than they do in sort of a discussion board type of environment, allowing them to bring in their own experiences, real world examples to make the concepts they're learning more relevant and have them more connected, to be able to ask and answer each other's questions, mentoring and peer learning to learn from each other and as an asynchronous tool to allow that 24/7 type of learning. Yellowdig, it resembles social media, and so students are very comfortable knowing how to post and comment and all that kind of fun stuff. It's supported by a gameful learning system that motivates students to come into the community and to create better conversations. And it can work with your LMS, whatever that may happen to be, or work without your LMS, whatever that may not happen to be. Wanted to talk just for a minute about the community of inquiry framework, which sort of gives a foundation of what students need to succeed. And there are three important elements of that in this framework. The teaching presence, the idea that you and I as instructors are in front of our courses and we're providing structure, guidance, information, and really having a one-to-many conversation with our students and maybe a little bit of a many-to-one conversation back. And then there's the cognitive presence, the idea that students are learning the material. They're thinking about the material, whether they're doing an assignment or reading a textbook or what have you, processing that information. But then finally, there's that social presence, the idea, like we were talking about before, that students, we all have things to learn from each other. We all have experiences. We all see what's happening in the world. We have different perspectives. If we're all in Grace's class and Grace says something, we all hear it. We may come away, even though we heard the same exact words, we may come away with a sort of a different take on it. When we are able to interact with each other on it, we may find out that we can learn a new perspective from a peer or a colleague. And that's the very simple definition. But the thing is, that social presence, while we probably think it's there, it's often assumed or frankly ignored. And I'll just give you two quick examples. In a face-to-face classroom, whether it's a Zoom session like this, some sort of synchronous session, being in the same room or being in the same Zoom room, we think, oh, that must be the social presence. We're all together. But the reality is that's really much more of that teaching presence. I am talking to you. I am guiding every conversation. I'm choosing who to call on, and I'm choosing what we're talking about in that context. And even if students want to be part of that, I'm only able in the 50 minutes 3 times a week or whatever your cadence is to get to a certain percentage of them. And even in that context, I'm choosing what we're talking about. So that social presence isn't really there. And in an online discussion board type of situation, we would also make the case that may not be fully implemented there either. We have that typical social assignment where instructors give a weekly prompt and require all students to respond to that prompt and then reply to 2 of their peers by Sunday at midnight. They give it Monday morning, it's due Sunday at midnight. And so procrastination is actually built in here because students view this as an assignment with a due date and they organize their lives accordingly. Maybe they're born procrastinators or whatever, but maybe they just have other things to do. So this is due Sunday night, so they wait. It's built in right there. On top of that, it's not an organic conversation. Everybody's replying to the same prompt, and the assignment usually requires them to reply to 2 of their peers. And oftentimes what they'll do is look at the last 2 posts in that discussion board and write, I agree, well said, or whatever, and get out of there. I call that post and run. And basically, as that semester goes on, even those go-getter students realize that there's not an organic conversation happening here. This is merely a public way to submit my assignment to the instructor. And really at the end of any of those weeks, there's nobody who's ever going to go back into those conversations except for the poor instructor, who then has to read all those hopefully well-written responses. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, exactly. And the Yellowdig community is actually very different than that. The instructor doesn't need to be at the start of every conversation. As we said, students can ask each other questions. In fact, they'll get incentivized to answer each other's question, which can save you as the instructor some work. Conversations don't need to end at the end of any particular time. They can ebb and flow. They can reemerge when something in that conversation or that concept becomes important again. Multiple conversations can be happening at any particular time. And basically it's a much more organic experience, and it also is a much more enjoyable experience, not only for students, but also for the instructor. And you know, I think that's enough of me talking for the moment. So, oops, I want to just kill the slides for a minute so we can all see each other. And you know, let's start about, you know, what, you know, Grace, Julia, and Jill, what your experience with your students as far as interactions or anything that you want to share before you discovered Yellowdig. What can you tell us what the good things and the bad things were related to that? Anyone who wants to start.
I'll start.
Great.
I hated grading Blackboard or whatever learning management system I was using, these discussion forums, because I felt as if I always went in expecting more conversation, more community. And what I got was a whole lot of answers that tended to look alike. Part of it is because they go out on the internet and find what the answer should look like to a particular case study. The other part was they were all trying to find the words that they thought I wanted to hear. And so, but you know, before Yellowdig, this is the tool I had, and I experimented with some other tools. And the other tools, although a lot prettier and flashier, were still keeping us into that one-way communication, that I was the audience instead of the other students, the audience. And so we'd have the post once, reply 3 times by Sunday night. And we sort of got into that. And when I was invited to participate in Yellowdig, I'll have to admit, I went in with a little bit of okay, well, we'll see what's going on. And I was blown away that the whole conversation changed, the whole feeling changed. Suddenly, I was not the only audience. So I don't know if Julia and Jill had that same feeling.
Absolutely. So we went from, you showed the graph, and this was something that really made an impact on me when I first started learning about Yellowdig, that initial training, where it starts out with, you've got the weekly assignments and it gets worse over the semester, that procrastination sets in and the quality of the conversation would just degrade over time. So when I was working my first semester with Yellowdig, I had an introduction class. So it was students that were brand new to college. They hadn't taken a college class before. Maybe they had not been in an online learning environment before. So we had a little bit of a learning curve of how to get them going. But what I noticed is that there was an improvement in quality of the conversation rather than a degradation. It was getting better and better and better. By the time the semester was over, I had students saying, I'm sorry, this is going to be over. I have really been enjoying this. I really feel connected with my classmates. And like you said, Grace, it wasn't an assessment assignment where they were trying to do what they thought I wanted. It was a co-learning conversation where we were all learning from each other. People could bring in the topics that they wanted to talk about. I felt like I was a learner right alongside them and not the one that they're trying to report to and earn their grade.
Excellent. And Julia, anything that you'd like to add about your experiences before Yellowdig?
Sure. One of the things that I kind of pride myself in, I guess, is that I find it a challenge to create really great open-ended discussion questions. Hey, if we're going to have to do discussion boards, then let's have some great discussion. I could not create a open-ended question interesting enough to engage my students. It was still an assignment. I was still asking them to post on a topic, and then assigning them to also offer feedback. And where Yellowdig differs is that the student chooses how they will interact with the tool. If they are comfortable creating posts for other students to respond to, some students, that is their strength. Other students are very comfortable participating and responding to those. And so each student could find their comfort level and where they fit in that community.
I just want to add one thing to that, or maybe two things, I don't know. But you make an interesting point. In Yellowdig, it is not about the posting, it's about the conversation. And in fact, in our gameful learning system that is, again, designed to motivate students, there is a premium paid for commenting. Commenting is where we tend to offer a little more incentive there, because we want to create deeper and better conversations. But going back to what all three of you have sort of mentioned before, as an instructor, did you feel somewhat, what did you feel frustrated? I guess I'll just come out and ask. Was there any frustration with the before Yellowdig in that interaction with students?
Before
Like
Yellowdig,
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I spent so much time grading and I wasn't even an intense grader. I'm not looking for grammar or anything like that, but I would put so much of my weekly time into grading the discussions and so much less time. And then in, developing the discussion. So it was all kind of behind the scenes stuff. Once we switched to Yellowdig, all of that time, 100% was student engagement with me.
Fantastic. Grace or Julia, anything else you want to add to that?
I agree with Julia. I mean, I pride myself on being a good teacher, especially a good online teacher. I've been doing it for, well, if I told you how many years, you'd know how old I was. But anyway, and it is frustrating when you try and you think you've got it. Oh, okay, I've got it this time. They're going to love this discussion question. It really will open up the class. And no matter how hard we tried, that was the difference in Yellowdig. Yellowdig, I did not have to try hard. With Yellowdig, I presented the prompt, I presented the topic, I presented the scenario, I presented the case study, and I let the teaching process unfold. And that was one of the biggest differences. And like Jill, I used to put a lot of time into grading and giving feedback, and feedback to the entire group, feedback to individuals. And I found with Yellowdig, I spent far less time doing that and far more time actually being part of my students' community.
Awesome. Julia, any last words on this piece? I mean, they're not really last words, but.
Well, no, and I try to continually empathize and put myself in my students' shoes. And frankly, as a student, I hated discussion boards. And here I had to step in as an instructor, and I'm like, oh man, and so I try, to make these discussions as interesting as and engaging and, thought-provoking. You want all of these things to happen, these light bulbs to come on for your students. And frankly, that's just not accomplished through tools that we traditionally use in online learning.
You actually are taking me to the next question I have, but before I get to that question, I want to share my own experience. Well, in addition to teaching, for a long time, I spent parts of 12 summers scoring AP US government exams, and over the course of 10 days with 750 other professors and high school teachers and things like that, I would read myself between 3,000 and 5,000 essays, all written to one and only one prompt. And, so hundreds per day. And yeah, that can be a little mind numbing a little bit, I think. And, so I totally get that. Plus, I obviously had my own teaching experience as well. But you brought up, we were talking about your frustration as instructors, but Julia, you brought up the frustration of students as well. Yeah. And so, I mean, how do you think students feel about discussion board assignments?
Oh, I can tell you 100% they tell me in the discussion boards that they hate them. Do they get points marked off for that? No. Do I have to tell them that I hate discussion boards too? No, but
Yeah, you probably
but
ought not
they're
to.
very, I mean, they will say in their posts, I really hate doing these, but I guess I have to. So, that's their attitude.
They're
I see a lot. No, go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say they're very anxiety provoking for
Yes.
students because students are trying to look for the words they think we want to hear. And that's part of it.
Yeah, and Jill, I'll let you chime in here, but to some degree, do you find the experience that students, they're writing basically oftentimes the same thing as the other students? They're trying also not to plagiarize each other, and that makes it difficult for them to get along. And really, where does that lead to as far as those replies that they have to give to each other? Where is the opportunity even to have that conversation? I sometimes think to myself that rather, if it's important that you need to assess them on whatever that prompted discussion is, that prompted question that you're presenting, why not just accept that as a written assignment and grade it on its own, rather than requiring a fake conversation to happen after that? I'm sorry, Jill, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, no, like Grace and Julia are saying, I try really hard to get some very interesting and engaging assignments for the discussion boards, but it's still about performance. It's still about, are you hitting the items that are in the rubric or whatever it is? And especially in my intro classes, I find students actually will take the hit on their grade rather than having to go through the hard work of making that discussion board assignment that they see as just busy work. They would rather have a few points lower on their average, even if it drops them a letter grade. I've seen students who just will not participate in the discussion boards in the LMS. They lose an entire letter grade, even though they're really good with everything else, and they'd rather just take that hit. But with Yellowdig, it wasn't so much anymore performance. It wasn't about a rubric. It was about learning from each other. And I found, especially in the introduction classes, that they would bring in other topics. They would talk about what did they do this weekend. They would talk about something they're struggling with their family or with their job, or they just got a new job, and they wanted to celebrate with their classmates. And they would come up with this stuff. And at first I thought, this isn't a good idea. They should be talking about our subject matter. But what we see, especially if we, start looking at the psychology of this, we're humans. Humans learn best in a relationship with other people. And if we have the freedom to create those more personal conversations in Yellowdig, even if they don't get points for them, it doesn't matter, so long as they're having those connections and finding common interests and finding common struggles and sharing with each other and encouraging each other, they develop that sense of relationship and community that helps them learn better. And they end up with better grades in the end. Regardless of what happens with the discussion grade, overall, everything is better performance because they feel connected with their classmates.
Thank you for that. You're not going to get an argument from me on that. I do want to mention to some people who may be listening to this, Jill has talked about, organic conversations that sometimes go outside the boundaries of the course concepts. I want to assure you that those things can be fantastic, but if you're looking to not encourage that type of conversation, there are ways in Yellowdig to either make sure that students aren't compensated with points for them, or to just sort of put them out of the ability to do that. I personally like the idea that students can have these other types of conversations in the community, and frankly, I think sometimes they make their way back into connecting with the course concepts as well. But you do have as instructors control over that, so I just want to make that clear. As far as
in my classes, and I taught both entry level classes and capstone classes with the Yellowdig. And what I found, and I taught both in my team project class, it was more of a social kind of thing. And in my supply chain management class, it was very definitely focused on case studies. But in both classes, I allowed points for any kind of post. And I held my breath a little bit, because I think, it feels a little bit like social media. I'm going to end up with a Facebook kind of conversation, or they're gonna, flame each other, or they're gonna talk about things where it's not part of the classroom experience. And I never, ever in my classes, no matter what it was, saw any kind of abuse of this. Everybody still treated it as if it were a classroom, but a better classroom. I had one student who emailed me after summer class, and she said she had never felt closer to students, even in face-to-face classes, that she felt this using Yellowdig in an asynchronous online class was better than a face-to-face class.
They had more opportunity to interact than they do in a face-to-face class with their peers. And for those of you who might be, thinking that it is Yellowdig is social media, it is not. It is a closed environment that you as the instructor controlled, and we do not get those bad behaviors, especially if you follow our default point settings and best practices, because students are relying on each other to get those points, and it really does create a much more you don't end up with the trolling behaviors as you're sort of mentioning there, and there's a lot of reasons for that.
Bob, if
yeah,
I may interject,
please.
one thing about the value of the off-topic discussion, and in online learning, especially in building that sense of community, there is such value in those off-topic discussions because they create a safe space and an area for students to support and lift one another up. At the technical college level, many of our students are working parents, and they sometimes a mom or a dad may post, "Hey, I'm struggling. This is a lot. How do you guys balance this?" And that's where I step back and just let their fellow classmates, the rest of the community, come in and lift them up. We can't get that through discussion boards.
Yeah, and I just want to take this opportunity to point out that many of us work at institutions where our students are, as you say, working along with their courses. They may be first generation college students. They may have English as a second language or struggling with that. And I think it's fair to say that the asynchronous nature and the social nature of Yellowdig really allows those people to feel more comfortable in being there, and to find people who are like them, find people so they don't feel alone. And while they'll feel more connected to your course and your class and their classmates, they're also going to feel more connected in these days to the institution itself. They're not going to feel like they're alone, and they're more likely to stay in school, frankly, than they might have otherwise, and succeed in their programs. So excellent point. I'm just going to shift the conversation a little bit, and we do want to share a few examples from your various Yellowdig conversations. But I want to ask you, in the first place, how did you learn about Yellowdig, and what made you decide to try it?
That's a Grace question.
Actually, about 4 years ago, I had a colleague who was trying to get me interested in looking at Yellowdig, and trying to get me on her side as an assistant dean to start pushing for a pilot. And I'll admit, I was a little bit, the social media thing was like, it's like social media, and that really turned me off. And so I was pleasant to her, but I was not really, embracing it. So it went on. And finally, my daughter, who attends a university, online university that uses Yellowdig comprehensively in all their classes, in their recruiting, in their everything. I happened to mention, well, they want me to participate in this pilot. And she goes, "Oh my gosh, you've got to do it, Mom." Now, I listened to my daughter because she is also a project manager for a large company in their corporate university. So she is an instructional design expert as well. And she says, you've got to do this. It'll change your way of thinking about teaching online. And so then that's when, okay, well, maybe they need somebody with a critical eye in this pilot. And within a week of working with Yellowdig, I was the biggest convert. And
Well, that's great to hear. And Jill and Julia, you followed Grace's lead. Is that
Sure. Well, I heard rumors that there was this little pilot program going on, and I basically begged to be in the pilot, and so they allowed me to come in a little later. So glad that I was offered that opportunity.
in just a few minutes, I want to get to some examples from your various communities, but I want to talk to you about your starting to use Yellowdig. What was that like? Was it difficult to understand what was going on in Yellowdig and to adopt the pedagogy and to implement it in your courses?
For me, I think it took a mindset shift because I was so used to that weekly cadence of here's your assignment, here's when you should have responses. And so I had to completely set aside all my notes and all my assignments for discussion boards. I did eventually start coming back and using some of those as prompts, just kind of, off schedule whenever it ended up things slowing down. But to kind of hand things over to the students and let them be a little bit more in the lead of the learning process took a major mindset shift for me. And then for my first class using it, it was a completely intro level course, first semester at the school, students coming in, they didn't know how to use a computer, much less communicate online. Maybe they have Facebook or TikTok or something on their phones, but that's about it. So I had to start setting some expectations and modeling communication in that online environment. But by the end of that first semester, they were completely on board, way more than what I expected them to be, to the point where they were really upset if we were going to, not be able to keep it after the pilot. There was a lot of amazing positive feedback from my students saying, this is amazing. I had one student, I think you're going to show the screenshot from her comment, that she said it pretty much saved her learning experience, that she went from failing when she was trying to do discussions in our LMS to Yellowdig, had her so engaged and experiencing that success in that environment, and that sense of connection, that she was able to engage and be successful in her classes. Yeah, that's it.
Is that the quote you were talking about?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
All right. So basically this student was having trouble and
right. She had previous semesters before we started with Yellowdig, and then she just happened to end up in one of the pilot classes that, that I was teaching, one of us in the pilot was teaching. And she went from, I was expecting for this to be awful because I'd seen it before and I had not been successful with previous discussion environments. And then we came into this, and this was just so much different that it saved her learning experience. Warm, familiar kind of setup. Some of them would say this felt familiar because it does feel like social media. So it's got that engagement sense where, we talk about synchronous being the way to really connect with our students. And then we went through 2020 and now we're all stuffed into the asynchronous for a while. And Yellowdig kind of takes that asynchronous environment and makes it into an asset rather than a disadvantage, because now students can come in when they're feeling reflective about something they've learned or some challenge they faced at work. It could be middle of the night and they come in and they post and they have a chance to connect with their students in that environment. It just became a point of connection for all of us, and not just an assignment that you have to check off before the end of the week.
Yeah, I want to just say a couple of things. First of all, this quote that you shared is not particularly unique. We get that a lot, and
I'm sure,
students who would otherwise maybe not stay in school or they stay in school, and that's fantastic. The other thing that I wanted to key in on was something you said at the beginning of that sort of part of the conversation, was that you were modeling behavior. And that is, part of our mantra, so to speak, that is the role of the instructor, is to model behavior rather than to lead every conversation. And as you said, Jill, and I'm interested in Grace and Julia's feeling about this, that is a paradigm shift. Right. It's a change in the way you're doing. You have to let go of the reins a little bit there. And, that can be it can be scary for an instructor to do that, maybe a little bit, but also it maybe takes us out of that, position of the sage on the stage that we're so used to. So Grace and Julia, what kind of experience did you have as far as that goes, and what kind of modeling do you do?
Sure. I want to say first that the training that a new user and that instructors get with Yellowdig to utilize the tool is outstanding. And I really listened to your advice, Bob, during that training on not assigning any kind of writing prompts or anything. So that's the pathway that I took. I was skeptical, I have to admit, but I thought, you know what, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to use it the way that they recommend the tool, and then, I can make adjustments moving forward. So I went in with that mindset, and my mindset was, I'm not going to prompt, but I will model for the students kind of what I expect them to see in their post. And that's what I did. And it's amazing when you see that connection blossom, but it was refreshing for me as an instructor to make that shift and to become the way that I describe it is that I become a co-learner with my students. I become part of that community.
And I mean, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but you end up learning from your students. I mean, when they're allowed to share their experiences and how they see the world, sometimes that can be something that enhances your teaching going forward. I mean, I can think of a particular class that I had one point where I had students who were came from a very different background than me. And oh my gosh, the things I learned in that class, I will never forget. And it definitely changed the way I taught going forward from that. And if I hadn't had that experience, basically it was an important experience. Let's leave it at that. So yeah, I
Bob,
totally.
I want to jump in here because
Yeah,
I had
please.
a little bit different experience from Julie and Jill. I used some of my the same case studies in my supply chain management class, my upper level supply chain management class that I used in the boring forums. I also used some of the same prompts and discussions in my team project that I used under the forum kind of system. But what I did is modify them to make them more open and inviting. But there was a whole different response. There was, even with the boring case studies where go read the case study and then let's look at this, and this about the case study. It was a whole different thing. The students, I wasn't getting answers that all sounded alike. They were able to do what a case study is supposed to do, is to create an analysis, to let them connect what they were learning in the textbook with their experiences. And so what I was getting is a lot of not only good analysis of the case study, but boy, this is like where I work. This is like what I saw. And so I actually did have weekly prompts, but I handled those prompts a lot differently than I did under a discussion forum system.
Yeah, and I'll just say I'm glad that you had that great experience, Grace. When instructors still want to use those types of questions, we try to encourage them to use optionality in whether you're going to start your own conversation or maybe answer someone else's. As we said, we're trying to create deeper conversations. And also we would encourage that if you're going to do that, that you also allow these other types of conversations in the community and not only the weekly prompt. You're trying to, you have a paradigm shift in the Yellowdig community, but students need to have that paradigm shift as well. You need to let them know this is not, come in twice a week to read the prompt and then answer it, right? So I think that you obviously handled that really well, Grace. I want to share just a couple of the screenshots that you all shared with us to show people what we're kind of looking at here. The first one, I don't know whose class this is from, showing an active conversation. Yeah, so tell us about this a little bit, Julia.
Yeah, that's just from a summer class. And again, there was no prompt. The students could post whatever they want. I asked that it be technologically based, but you know, that's a pretty wide parameter. But anything that would help them, you know, in the class. And so this is what this student actually, she was a great contributor.
So this
I had a,
student started this discussion. I just want to be clear.
oh, this was the student. Yes, this
Okay.
is the student's post. This is what she offered, and it was a very engaging conversation. As you can see by the number of comments, there were 28 comments on this post. I could challenge anybody to come up with 28 comments on a discussion board post. But yeah, this was completely student initiated post.
And so
And
students
participation.
are helping each other out. They're learning from each other here. And you know, I noticed that at the top here, this little guy, what might this be?
Yeah, I gave this student an accolade. So I awarded them basically a little badge. It's part of the gamification, you know, aspect, and that allowed them to earn more points. I think this one was a great conversation or conversation starter. So yeah, that's
And yeah, and you know, so that goes a little bit to the instructor presence, your role in the community. You know, again, not feeling the need to lead everything, not needing to start every conversation. Sometimes if students are having a great conversation, what happens if you walk up to them in the classroom and you join that conversation? They stop that conversation, they look at you, and a new conversation goes on. So what Julia did here with this great conversation is she let them know that this is the kind of conversation she's looking for simply by clicking, well, I think it's actually 2 clicks to award that accolade. And they all know, because they're all going to see it, it's going to go back to the top of the feed, that this is the kind of conversation that the instructor wants. And it's you know, it still shows that instructor presence. It shows the students that this community is important to you without a heavy lift on your part. You know, another way that you can be active in the community is to comment, to extend conversations. If a conversation isn't going where you think it ought to go, that's your opportunity to extend it. So we would encourage instructors to comment and to use those accolades. That's actually going to probably have more value for you overall than posting is. At least that's what our data shows. We have this other post. I don't know, again, is this also from you, Julia, or is it somebody else's?
Yeah, I believe so. Without seeing the name,
oh, okay. Yeah.
I sent in a few screenshots, but yes, that's probably mine looking at Access in Excel.
So peers, again, helping each other out on, in this case, it looks like they're talking about Access, Microsoft Access,
yes,
the database,
Access in Excel.
and helping each other. Yes, excellent. Sure. So yeah, those are just a couple examples. I'm going to turn off the slides again for a minute. So let's talk about, you know, how this may, I mean, clearly your students started to connect with each other. They started to connect with the material and all that kind of stuff. And you've both mentioned that you've all mentioned that you've learned things from your students through this process. But let's talk about the course concepts themselves a little bit, in that, you know, it's important for us as instructors to know where our students are. Were you able to inform your teaching at all from what you saw in the community and make adjustments based on what you saw in the community? And can you share some thoughts on that, any of you?
Bob, the analytical tools that I used in Yellowdig were absolutely wonderful. Number one, you know, I agree, the training was great and I trusted the process. I used the default settings. I, you know, listened to what you had to say about best practices, and I, you know, I trusted the tool, and the analytics were really good. One of my favorite ones is I can't remember what you call it. I know where to click on it, but it shows the connections between all the individual students.
That'd be the network graph.
Okay, and so you can tell if somebody's not connected. And as I learned to use this tool, and as the community evolved. I noticed the second semester I taught with Yellowdig, that first week, there was nobody sitting out there by themselves, unconnected. And I thought that was interesting. And then I noticed a couple of my students actually shared with me that they look for people who aren't getting comments so they could give them comments to make them feel like they were part of the community.
And, the student who gets those comments is going to benefit from the other students who are awarding those comments. So it really is a way, for one thing in Yellowdig, if a student gives a thumbs up to another student, the student who gives the thumbs up does not get any points for that. They get a nice warm feeling in their heart. But we also know that the student who gave the thumbs up, though, read the post or the comment. I mean, this is a great indicator that's going on. But what I want to know is, relative to the course concepts, did you see examples of where you saw, oh yeah, students are totally getting this and I can move on? Or maybe some examples of like, oh my gosh, maybe they're not quite there. And, this is an opportunity for me to sort of course correct before any kind of final assessment.
Sure, that's a really important aspect, because we, as educators, we know that every group of students is different. And so Yellowdig allows me to look at the students, and they will bring up concepts that they're not quite getting. That what it allowed me to do, and how I personally handled that, it was when I saw small things like that creep in, then I jotted off and came up with a video that gave some extra information. Or if they were struggling with a project, maybe I can give a video example demonstrating that skill that they are struggling with. So yeah, it definitely, Yellowdig allows you to course adjust immediately.
And there's a few things that I think I want to touch on that help with that to some degree. First of all, the organic nature and the ability for students to start their own conversations might present a point of focus that you didn't know that they were having trouble with, and as opposed to just asking them the specific questions that you want to ask. So that can be helpful as well. The other thing is topics in Yellowdig. Yellowdig has a system of topics that you create as instructors that relate to those course concepts, and that under our defaults need to be added to every single post by the student who's creating the post or whoever's creating the post. And that allows you to you can see the data behind those topics and which students are using those topics, but it also allows you to filter those conversations to get to those. Did you have any thoughts on using those topics? And
I know I use the topics. No, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jill.
Yeah, I use the topics just to kind of spawn some of the conversation. I would every now and then go in and add a couple more topics, so that as they're trying to think of things that they could talk about, they could pull from that list of topics and get an idea of how to start another conversation. So I use the topics for that. I also use the accolades for that. One thing I really liked about the accolades is you can create your own. I don't remember if this one was built into it or not, but the taught me something new is my favorite. So I'm always looking for a discussion that's teaching me something. And I would tell the students, I've got a lot of points attached to this accolade. If you can pull something on there that I'm going to learn, that's a big deal.
I want to be clear that only instructors or TAs or whoever the instructional staff is can award those accolades. Those are not available for students, and we probably wouldn't want them to be. So one of the things about that to me is that, as compared to being in a synchronous session or whether it's a face-to-face or like this, the student participation, we look around the room and we see students' eyes open up and we think, oh, they got it because their eyes open. We don't know what they know from that. But in Yellowdig, because it is a part of their grade, they're all obligated to be in that community. And again, they're being incentivized by the gainful learning system and motivated to be in the community as well. We have a much bigger picture and pool of data to look at to see, are they really getting it? I mean, that's one of my favorite things about the Yellowdig experience.
What I found is that, of course, they have to go into the learning management system and into our class to get to their Yellowdig. And so what I found is they were logging in to the class earlier in the week and interacting with their other assignments. because they wanted to get in and go to Yellowdig. And I actually saw an increase in midterm and final grades in one of my classes that was astounding to me. I was using the same assessment I had been using all along, but that change after Yellowdig, it was like, at first it was like, oh no. And then it dawned on me in looking at their logins in the learning management system. We use Blackboard. They were actually going into Blackboard more often instead of just that once on Sunday night kind of thing. They were going into Blackboard earlier in the week so they could get to Yellowdig and participate.
Well, that's a really good point for on a couple of levels. First of all, the motivation of the students themselves, but also the idea that, Yellowdig can connect to whatever learning management system you're using, and pretty much any one that they're using, you can do that. And what that does is when you connect Yellowdig to the learning management system, students enter Yellowdig through that LMS, and it populates them into the Yellowdig community, but it also enables the Yellowdig grade passback. So you don't have to manually do any of these items.
Oh, that's the best part. That's the best
Right,
part.
no more grading.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. I know we've got about 9 minutes left. I wanted to share really quickly. There were a couple of other quotes. Bree, maybe you can share whether these were quotes from Georgia Northwestern, or are these quotes just general quotes that we have? I'm just not sure where these
Yes,
are.
I believe these all came from Julia.
Oh, they're all from you, Julia. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, they're
I
student
love,
books, not
I
all.
love collecting data. I'm all about the surveys.
So
Yeah.
yeah, did you want to say anything about these?
Well, I think, as you said earlier, Bob, these comments are not, these aren't unusual to you. They were refreshing to me and continue to be. So I just wanted to know how my students liked the experience, and so I made so this was my Yellowdig post, and they responded. It's refreshing.
As we're here at the NBEA, I just want to ask you, about business education and the use of this platform. Do you feel that this is an appropriate place for, it's clear that you do, but I'd like you to speak a little bit specifically about Yellowdig and business education, if you have any comments on that.
For me, so I'm only an adjunct at GNTC.
Not only an adjunct.
Right. My
Oh my
full-time
goodness.
work is working with Cengage and publishers and content creators and everything. So we have, Slack and other environments like that. That's the way businesses communicate these days, is to be in something like Slack and having those conversations. Cengage, for example, has pretty much gotten rid of all of their in-person offices, and most people are working from home now. So the way they stay in contact with each other is through these more informal chat platforms. And so students, especially in business, need to be getting that exposure to that kind of communication where you're building a personal relationship at the same time as building that professional teamwork, dynamic. So to be able to build that in Yellowdig gives them pretty much a replica experience of what they're going to see once they get out into the real world.
Awesome. Any other comments on business education? Julia,
echoing what Jill said, what I noticed and really still intrigues me is that my students were communicating better in writing with Yellowdig than they were in discussion boards.
Yes.
And for students that I have in multiple classes, it was just like, is this even the same student? It's just so eloquent, and I got to see a different side of that student, but they all demonstrated such an excellent level of professionalism in the community. I think that was really surprising. I anticipated maybe having to monitor a little more, but I didn't see that. It was very high level of professionalism with the students.
Fantastic. And I know we only have a few minutes left, and certainly we want to encourage anyone from who's listening to add any questions that they might have into the chat. I want to thank you as we're sort of wrapping up here for the time you've spent not only here with us today, but also in preparation of this webinar, but also, of course, for your your use of Yellowdig and going out on a little bit of a limb to try it in a when you had some sort of trepidations about it. Any last words any of you want to add before we hit the road, so to speak?
I would, one instance that I like to share that really surprised me in, let's see, it was this past summer, was in one of my classes. They were talking about, of course, I teach computer information systems, but they were talking about setting up a home lab, and a student had mentioned, hey, I've set up this home lab, and how many of you have a home lab? And nobody had a home lab like he had. Well, what does your home lab look like? This student took it upon himself to make a 15-minute YouTube video to share with the rest of the class how to set up a home lab.
Wow.
I couldn't have dreamed of an assignment that would have accomplished that. I mean, it was just like, that was a win for me. I can't even describe the feeling as an educator that I had. Was like, yes.
That's great. And again, I mean, I think one thing that we didn't really talk about today was the media in Yellowdig, the capabilities of media. You can put in photos or videos or web links or files or whatever, and really, again, it's going to allow students to find their own path to communicate in the way that feels right to them in relation to your course concepts. Grace and Jill, any other last words that you'd like to add? And you don't feel obligated.
Basically, I have to say that Yellowdig has caused me to level up. I like to play my computer games as well, and I feel like Yellowdig leveled me up as an instructor and as a teacher. I am not the same teacher I was before I started using Yellowdig, and it's not just in discussions or in that sort of thing. I approach teaching differently. Instead of, I think I'm allowing the process to unfold when it comes to the learning now in all parts of my teaching, not just in the community or in the discussion.
Oh, maybe that should be our new motto: level up with Yellowdig. I love that.
That's
Jill?
awesome.
Yeah, with my psychology and education background, I'm all about the research. And one thing I was really impressed by with the training, and then with all the documentation that's available within Yellowdig, and even the Yellowdig community for instructors, where we could go and ask questions and get support if we had trouble along the way. Everything was supported by research. None of it was just made up as, oh, this will sound great for marketing. It was actually backed up by the things that you have seen, that you have researched, that you've found really works. And all of that information was available. It wasn't just, well, yeah, this is amazing. It was, here's what we've seen, here's what works. Stick with the defaults until you start, tweaking it for yourself. It was amazing to me how well structured and backed up this was, and that it wasn't just a big marketing tool.
Well, thank you for adding that as well. And we're pretty proud of all of that. I want to mention that if you're interested in learning more about Yellowdig, you can reach out to, me, bob@yellowdig.com. I'm not the, I can point in the right direction of where you need to go. And that's Bob at B-O-B. I know that's a little tricky, at yellowdig.com. I also, we can talk about opportunities for piloting and all that kind of stuff. I also want to share that we do have, Yellowdig has a series of upcoming webinars with our CEO on connected learning. If you want to go in dig in a little deeper, see what I did there? Dig in a little bit deeper. And if you're interested in those, you can just wave your phone at this little scan thing and get there to the site for that. And let's see. I also would really like to thank, well, again, I thank our wonderful participants here today. It's been a pleasure working with all of you and getting to know you. And I see that my colleague Bree has put a number of links in the chat related to any of this stuff, but I also want to thank NBEA for letting us do this today. I don't know if there's a hard stop on it. I'm happy to stick around if there's any further questions. But otherwise, thank you everybody for joining us.